Good morning, everyone. Thanks for dialing in today. We have got quite a number of people registered this morning, so we're going to just wait a couple of moments so that everybody can join and get comfortable, and then we'll begin. Great, numbers are increasing. That's lovely. Okay, well, good morning, everybody. My name's Faith Denning. I'm the marketing manager here at InfoTrack. Welcome to today's webinar, where we're going to hear all about the cybersecurity landscape and learn how we can stay cyber secure ourselves. So taking you through today's webinar, I'm delighted to be joined by Mike Hughes, who's the Chief Technology Officer, and Travis Scholes, who's the Commercial Director, both from LMS, along with Annabella Barker, who's a Product Manager from InfoTrack. Before we begin the webinar, I'd just like to draw your attention, please, to the Q&A tab, which is located at the bottom of your screens. We will be running a Q&A at the end of this session, so please type any questions that you might have for either Mike or Travis or Annabella, along with your name into the Q&A box. That way, if we run out of time or your question requires further clarification, we can extract your information and follow up with you directly after the webinar. This webinar is expected to last about 45 minutes, although we may overrun depending on timings and the number of questions we get. So if you are happy to stay on, then please do. But this session is being recorded, so if you do need to leave, then we'll be able to send you a copy of the recording anyway. So without further ado, I will hand you over to Mike, who's going to start the presentation for you. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Faye. Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Mike Hughes. I'm a CTO from LMS. I think it's probably a pretty safe assumption that most of you know who LMS are, but just in case there are a few of you that don't, we are a conveyancing panel manager predominantly. We've been around for a long time, over 20 years. We work with over 28 UK lenders, particularly focused on remortgage and sale and purchase work. So a big part of what we do is managing data. And so information security is super important to us. Thanks everybody for coming. You know, it's a good opportunity to speak to you all about a topic that maybe we don't all love, but it's all important to us. So very briefly, a bit about me. I've worked in IT for over 30 years. Most of that time as an IT director, as a CTO. I did spend 7 or 8 years on the other side of the fence, on the dark side, working for an IT reseller. So meeting other CTOs, you know, helping them resolve some of their issues and problems, which was good experience for me in terms of seeing both sides of the fence. I have been at LMS now for 4 years. And let me say, right from the get-go that I am absolutely not a cybersecurity expert, okay? I'm here today to talk to you about what LMS is doing on the back of reading my own personal experience, bring that to bear, and hopefully some of that will be of interest to you. I'm sure there are people on this call who know a lot more about cybersecurity, particularly the technology that supports that, than I do. I don't purport to be that at all. So if you came here expecting this to hear from a cybersecurity expert, I'm afraid you might be a little bit disappointed. Okay, so there's quite a few of us here, which is great. It would be really helpful to me, and probably to Faye and Travis also, to get a feel for the makeup of the audience. So we're going to use some technology. It's not advanced. It would be great if, when I describe your role, if you could use the raise hand feature in Zoom at the bottom of the screen there. And we'll just get a quick straw poll around how many people are from what kind of a role. It might help. It will help me shape kind of the conversation, really. So very quickly, I'm hoping this will take no more than about 30 seconds. Who here works in an IT, kind of an IT or security or a compliance role? If you are, could you raise your hand now? Yeah, maybe, okay. So 10 or so people in that role. Great. What about those of you who are in more of an operational role or a business support role? I'm watching my counter here. Okay, a few more. Great. And how many of you then are in more of a leadership role within your business? Okay, great. So a good mix, probably more people in a leadership role, maybe what I expected. Brilliant. Okay, that's really helpful. Before we move on to some of the content then, I'm a great believer in starting with the end in mind. So from my point of view, I wanted to just kind of express what I'm hoping that some of you and I will get from today's session. So if you're one of those people that are in a more of an IT or compliance role, I'm hoping that today from this session, you walk away with a couple of specific things that maybe you will think about differently than you have before, a couple of things you want to focus on. Something you hear something today that motivates you to go and have a look at something or ask a question or do something, take some action. because in the role that you're in, you probably know a lot of the things that I'm going to discuss already. If you're in more of an operational or a leadership role, I'm hoping that you get from me an external view of some of the challenges that your IT function or your compliance function, or perhaps your IT partner is facing in terms of meeting these challenges around cyber. And secondly, I hope that you walk away equipped with a couple of questions that you're going to go and pose those people that are responsible for this area in your business. Questions that might lead to a conversation about your cybersecurity footing, the actions you're taking, the way you're handling that. I won't be giving you all the answers to in the next 25, 30 minutes, how you make your whole organization cyber secure. So just to be really clear about expectations, we won't be getting quite that level of detail. I think if we were here for the next week, we probably wouldn't get quite that far. And I probably wouldn't be the person to deliver it. For some of you, a lot of the content I'm going to talk about is going to probably feel comfortable and familiar, but for some of you, hopefully, some of it's a bit different. If you're from an organization where your compliance function, your IT function, your operations, your leadership function are all completely aligned with in terms of cyber, you've got a plan, you know where you're at, you track your cybersecurity posture, you budget for cyber on an annual basis, you know what you're doing. If you do all those things, honestly, you should probably be running this session, not me. Because we don't do that today. We are trying really hard to mature the way we handle cyber. So maybe if you're doing all those things, maybe you'll be running one of these sessions in the future and I'll be in the audience listening. Because I've been quite careful to talk about the journey we're on. You know, I think most organizations are on a journey from where they are and where they want to be. And the world is changing so quickly that you never actually arrive. Okay, so moving on to some content. This, I hope, is the agenda that you've seen before. I'm going to very briefly go over it now and make sure that you hear the right thing. I am going to talk for a couple of minutes about context, about what's happened over the last few years, particularly because I think that's, to a large degree, the last 2 years has very much shaped the cybersecurity landscape that we sit within today. And I'm going to talk about what LMS are doing, really what some of the challenges we face, some of the approaches we're taking, some of the specific things we're focusing on, because I think that might be interesting to some of you. I think I won't cover all of that. It'll just be a bit of a mixed bag of give you a flavor of the areas that we're focusing on in terms of what we're doing about cybersecurity. I'm going to talk about the basic do's and don'ts. You know, again, this won't be exhaustive in any way. Those of you that come from this area, those of you in IT and compliance will know that the things I talk about are just a little snapshot of some of the key things that I think are important to focus on. So please don't take that as prescriptive in any way. It isn't. And finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about how LMS might be able to help you, and LMS and InfoTrack together might be able to help you moving forward. There isn't a huge amount of time for this session. It's a big topic. So I think a lot of the value will come from the questions that you ask. So please do use the Q&A feature in Zoom. We'll pick up as many of those as we can at the end. If we run out of time, we'll do a follow-up, not only in terms of the content of today, but actually we'll try and respond to as many of those questions as possible in the follow-up, so they won't get lost. Okay, so whistle-stop tour of the last few years from my point of view. Some of you may disagree with the focus and the emphasis I give here, but this is, you know, from my point of view, this is what I think the last couple of years have looked like and why that's important to us today. You know, when COVID hit back in 2020, if we, as you know, don't talk about the human and the health impact of that, think about from a business point of view, from a cyber point of view, you know, we had a mass move to remote working with, you know, the mandate was everybody needs to work from home. And I think from my point of view, what we saw was you know, security criminals took advantage of what was in essence a raft of vulnerabilities that were exposed by us as businesses as we activated or built remote access capabilities at speed to allow our workforce to work from home. So that, you know, that, if you like, that opportunity to cyber criminals drove a huge, you know, upswing, if you like, in terms of the number of threats that we as businesses were presented with and the number of successful breaches that occurred. And I think just some quick numbers, £7 billion is one number I've read from 2020, which is the cost globally to businesses of ransomware. And I think ransomware was a real feature of 2020. That number underrepresents probably the impact of ransomware in that year, because a lot of incidents go unreported. it's a big number. It was 50% higher than 2019, which just demonstrates, I think, the kind of just the scale of ransomware attacks that were happening back in 2020. The other thing was that there were the overall number of cybersecurity breach attempts, if you like, went up significantly. Again, I read some data in preparation for this session that said every 46 seconds, the average UK business was subjected to some form of breach attempt. I question that number to some degree, but when you look at the number of emails that your gateway is preventing getting through to your staff, and the number of scans of your network that are happening, if you have that data, it's a significant number, and the point is, I think it's growing, and it was certainly growing back in 2020. I mentioned as well there the SolarWinds supply chain vulnerability that we learned about in the end of 2020. I think I'll come back to why that was important, but very briefly, that was what we think was a Russian state-sponsored security vulnerability that had been around for more than a year. It affected 8,000 businesses around the world, and actually to this day, many of those businesses are not 100% confident that threat has been fully remediated within their infrastructures, which just tells you how damaging that was. I'm probably going to go a bit quicker than I just have been. So 2021, really an extension of some of the themes we saw in 2020. Ransomware continued to grow. The estimate I read is £20 billion worth of impact on businesses in the year. The really telling number for me is that one of the predictions I've read is that by 2031, that number will be 200 billion. What that tells me is that ransomware is not going away. I think this is a really important statistic. 80% of successful breaches originated in 2021 from a phishing attack. So many of you know what a phishing attack is. Just, phishing attack in essence is often delivered via emails, a bad actor getting someone to take an action or provide data by pretending to be a legitimate request for that. So, often you'll get an email that says, take this action, just give us this, log into this portal because it's what you expect. They pretend to be someone that you're familiar with, someone that you customarily log in with, or activate a piece of software in some way, or some code that's malicious. So these are really targeting individuals. So what we're seeing is 80% of successful breaches, data incidents, originate with a phishing attack. So the employee at the heart of that point of vulnerability, really. For 2020, I used the SolarWinds example. Last year, Log4j Apache vulnerability I read a report into that said it was the most significant vulnerability for a decade. It had a CVSS score of 10, which is the highest. What that basically says is it was really damaging. It affected hundreds of thousands of companies around the world. It led to data exfiltration, malware injection, botnet attacks, lots of ransomware deployments, all through that one vulnerability. And the reason I'm using those two examples is I think it shows a step change in cybersecurity threats. And when we do our risk analysis of cyber, it demonstrates what some of these bad actors are doing. Often state-sponsored, huge levels of investment, very sophisticated attacks, where the organizations that are perpetrating these are very patient. So these things can sit on people's networks for months or even years before they're activated. And for me, in terms of when we think about cybersecurity and the threat matrix that we're facing, actually the sophistication, the investment that's going into that on the heart of the bad actors just demonstrates how careful we need to be, and actually how we need to think about our own investment in protecting ourselves when the other side of the fence are so proactive, so patient, and so smart, really, in terms of how they're viewing, how they get into access our informational assets. So 2022, where are we today? The simplified group security incident from a few months ago demonstrates to me that the legal sector is absolutely a target for these criminals. What I see today, particularly from an LMS point of view, is that lenders are pushing more and more cybersecurity concerns onto their supply chain, and we in LMS absolutely part of that. And finally, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, a couple of things that come out of that I think are worthy of note. Again, if I don't talk about the human impact of that terrible situation and think about the cybersecurity impact. What we saw in the run-up to Russia invading Ukraine was a plethora of what are called wiper attacks against Ukraine, which is basically, think about ransomware, breaching someone's security defenses. And this was very much targeted at Ukraine infrastructure, Ukraine government, but also private sector firms. But instead of holding them to ransoms, trying to elicit money from those organizations, actually just deleting data, encrypting data, making it unavailable. So basically just being highly disruptive. So Russia was incredibly proactive in terms of in the run up to the invasion of Ukraine. And I guess one of the fears now is that nation states, organizations that are part of nation states that are aligned to Ukraine, as the UK are, could become a target for those kind of threats in the future. And I know that our government, takes very seriously the cyber threat from Russia in the new world context of the Ukraine crisis. And I've got a friend that works in the Home Office, and they're concerned about the UK's communications infrastructure, particularly the mobile networks. They talk about the concern about Russia potentially targeting the internet infrastructure within the UK. Now, there's not an awful lot we can do to affect that, but in terms of that's something that we probably do need to think about in terms of our own business continuity planning. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about the cost. I think these are, you'll get a copy of the slides obviously in the future, but what the trend I'm trying to portray with the points there about the cost of a breach really is that, the cost of the breach is only going up. The average in the UK was 3 million back in 2020. It's expected that the average cost of a data breach this year will be around 4 million. So that's a fairly obvious trend. And it's not too surprising that if you do lose informational assets, if someone, for example, steals data from you, the personally identifiable information, PII, personal data, is obviously the most costly in terms of if that's breached and lost, compromised in some way. So that's where we are today. I've probably spent a good 10 minutes on that. I'm going to try and accelerate a little bit as we move forward. And if I don't, Amy will be giving me a bit of a kick and saying, Mike, hurry up. Okay. The journey that we're on in terms of information security at LMS, this is a really important point, I think, for us. We work with 28 lenders, and we see year on year increasingly demanding requirements from our lenders. They expect us to be more capable, more sophisticated in terms of our own cybersecurity defenses. For example, their expectation around MFA, encryption of data at rest and in transit, increasingly stringent SLAs for us to remediate issues that we find within our own infrastructure. So, for example, if you do a pen test and you find some issues, whereas I think a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, the lenders might have said, well, 6 months is how long we'd expect to fix those. That might be only a month or two now. Those requirements are getting more and more stringent. And one of the interesting things is I think that we're seeing different requirements from different lenders. And I think a great example of that is your password policy. Now, passwords are really important in terms of cybersecurity, obviously. Some lenders will say, well, you should have really long, complex passwords, but you should only change them every now and again. And other lenders will say, well, actually, you should have quite long passwords, but change them really frequently. And we sit in the middle of that. We're 28 different lenders and 28 different sets of requirements. That different set of requirements from each lender is becoming more of a challenge, I would say. And with the number of lenders that we work with, and I'm sure many of you share this pain, just the number of information security audits and information security reviews that are done every year, we do somewhere between 20 and 30 of those every year. And each of those generally is becoming more onerous, which is a huge burden on our business. And I'm sure many of you feel the same. I understand fully why the lenders are doing that. I'm not complaining about it. It's the reality of the world we're in today. But I think it's important to note that is a huge burden. So our approach to that, really, we are just trying to mature the way that we think about, plan for, and execute our strategy around cybersecurity. And there's a couple of key points here. We could probably spend the next 2 hours talking about just this point, but if I just call a couple of points out. The first is that we try and instill in our staff an appreciation of data protection and security issues, and whenever they make a change, whether that's a technical change, whether that's an operational change, whether that's a project that we're going to run, we try and consider those issues and encourage our staff to consider those issues at the very beginning so that we understand them and we understand the impact of the changes that we make. I think that's more of a cultural change than anything else. And I certainly am not here today to say we've cracked that, because that's a journey we're on. We're trying to work with our teams, with our staff, to encourage them to think in that way. Because, unplanned change, impact of change that is not well thought through, where you don't understand the impact on your data security, your data protection footing, can become very costly later. The other thing that we're doing, it's an ongoing thing, it's never finished, is we're trying to align the way that we work, our policies, with best practice. And ISO 27001 is a big part of that. For many of you, you'll have had ISO 27001 accreditation for a long time. This will be very comfortable for you. For us, I'm going to talk about it a little bit on my next slide, but we made ISO 27001 accreditation. We didn't have it previously. We made that a priority for us a couple of years ago, and we got there. But actually, that's actually yielded a lot of benefit as well. And I feel very positive about our experience of not only having and working with ISO 27001, but actually achieving it as well. And the final point I want to make on this, quite a generic one, but I think it's really important, is that cyber risk sits within your overall risk framework, obviously. And again, we'll all have slightly different approaches to how we manage risk within our businesses. And I'm sure many of you are very capable and have very robust risk management policies and procedures. From our point of view, we made a conscious decision to take cyber risk outside of broader technology risk a couple of years ago. It was 2019, and so what we did was we did a really detailed cyber risk assessment, but more detailed than we'd ever done before. And then we compared that to our own maturity and the capabilities of our own mitigations to address those risks, and in essence came up with a very long list of things that we wanted to improve around our cybersecurity. We costed those, picked ourselves back up off the floor, having looked at that list, went and talked to the business about that list, and working with the business, then we agreed a priority list of the top issues, the top risks, and the top where we were perhaps weakest in terms of our cybersecurity footing. We then developed an action plan and put a budget in place for the next year to support that. And that's how we've been working for the last couple of years. And I think that's worked really well for us. We review that quarterly because things change, cybersecurity threats change, our own business changes. So we don't assume the annual plan is going to stay the same for the full year. But I think that level of focus that we gave cybersecurity back in 2019 is held in good stead over the last couple of years. And don't get me wrong, that list is still as long as it was. We're just knocking things off it, but adding things on at the bottom as I guess the risk landscape and the threat landscape changes. So do our wish list and of things that we want to improve. Moving on, this is a bit of an ad hoc slide, but I wanted to give you a flavor of the areas that we are focusing on. Either we've done or we're actually in the middle of doing at the moment. So I'm not going to go through these in detail, but just give you a bit of a flavor. So, we have achieved ISO 27001, and the standardized approach that's forced us to take is actually a really key part now about how we handle that increasing demand from lenders around information security reviews and information security audits. So as I said earlier, I do feel very positive about our experience with ISO 27001. It actually wasn't as painful as we maybe thought it would be, and we got through it quite quickly, and I think it's made a real difference to how we work as a business, and certainly how we engage with and have a common language that we can discuss cybersecurity concerns and information security concerns generally with our lender community. Back in 2019, we implemented a managed detection and response service. If you don't know what that is, it's on the slide as MDR, but in essence what that is some tooling, some technology that sits on our infrastructure, that monitors our whole infrastructure, that looks for anomalous behavior, which would indicate that actually someone's breached your defenses. Because you can have the best defenses in the world and you will still potentially be breached. So from our point of view, it's really important that if that happens, we want to know about it, because if you know about it, you can do something about it. The earlier you catch a breach, the less impact that breach potentially will have on your business. So, it isn't just about prevention, it is also about response. So by having a capability to identify a breach once it's occurred as quickly as possible, and then do something about that, is a really core capability for us. So we appointed a supplier to help us with that, put some technology in 2019. In essence, it's some technology and it's a service from a managed service partner which operates 24/7, because we're not a 24/7 business. And if a cybersecurity incident happens at 2 o'clock in the morning, we want to have the ability to respond to that then, not wait till 8 a.m. the next day. So we procured that back in 2019. We actually replaced that with another solution. Well, in the process of replacing that with another solution today. I mentioned this in a bit more detail because I think it's interesting that the solution we're implementing is AI based. It's a very different approach to most of the other tools that are out there in the market. There's a service layer on top of it for the 24/7 coverage. I'll know more about how that's gone, good or bad, over the next few months, and I'd be absolutely willing to share that with anyone who's interested in that as I know more. But I think for a lot of you, there might be some benefit to understanding how we get on with that capability, that new capability we're deploying, because I have high hopes for it, and I hope they are well-founded. But we'll know more in the future. We did 3 years ago move from annual penetration testing to continual testing, and we continue to do that. We changed provider of that last year because we felt we could get more out of it. That's really important. Penetration testing is super important, obviously. If I go back 2 years, maybe 3 years, we weren't doing internal vulnerability scanning, and that's just as important. So that's, again, some tooling that's going to sit and look across your network and find things that are inherently vulnerable. Alongside your patch management strategy, which, again, basically making sure that all of your applications, your software is up to date and not as many vulnerabilities are addressed as possible in that. Those two things together, super important. We weren't brilliant at it. We're a lot better at it today. Again, room for improvement. We are continuing to invest significant resource in improving our own integrations, and those are integrations upstream and downstream. So integrations that we have with third parties where we consume them, and integrations that we offer to our partners, to law firms, to integration partners such as InfoTrack. We've invested significantly over the last few years and continue to do so in delivering high quality, modern, scalable, dynamic, and perhaps in the context of this conversation, most importantly, secure integrations that are available. So that's a real area of focus for us, something we're going to touch on towards the end as well. We always focus on backups. Backups are your last line of defense. I'm going to mention it again in the future. I'm not going to talk in the next couple of minutes, but I'm not going to talk about it now. Backups super important. We've spent a lot of time on that. And again, maybe this one a bit more interesting. We'd not done this before last year, but last year we did our first red team test. If you don't know what that is, that's basically we employed an independent cybersecurity company to come in and hack us, which is a bit scary, I'll be honest. But we got a load of really useful information back there about things that we thought we were strong and perhaps we weren't strong, and things that we weren't doing that we should be. So there was a huge amount of intelligence we got from paying someone to get through our security measures. We've actually, on the back of that, we've done another one of those to see whether or not we had improved significantly after that. And I think the red team tests, they're not cheap. They're not hundreds of pounds, but they're not tens of thousands of pounds, but they're certainly not cheap. There's not the kind of thing you want to do every month because of the cost. If you can find the resource to do it, I would really encourage you to do so. I think they give you a load of valuable intelligence. If you're interested in talking about that, again, that's something I'd be happy to talk about in the future. We've put a lot of investment over the last 18 months into our SecureLink platform. We're not going to talk about too much today. In essence, we've built a platform that allows initially law firms and lenders to communicate directly and securely. The two reasons for that are, we want to improve the experience from the lender and from the law firm point of view, and facilitate quicker, more accurate, auditable communication between lenders and law firms. So that's been a real focus for us, because a lot of that communication today, it can be telephone, it can be email, which is inherently insecure, even fax, dare I say it. There's communication that flies around, particularly between lenders and law firms and other parties, including LMS, that we think will better sit within a secure platform. And we've built that now, and our current focus is on getting our major lenders to adopt that. And having got more lenders engaged in that, it would be great if more law firms like yourselves could get involved in that, and because I think we'll all benefit from it ultimately. The other thing that we're doing now that we weren't doing 2 years ago is we're conducting phishing simulations. So phishing, as I said earlier, your staff are one of your biggest points of vulnerability. So we are now simulating phishing attacks on our staff. We felt really good about that when we started, because we started out with quite basic, quite obvious phishing simulations, and our staff were brilliant at identifying those and not clicking on them and doing all those things. And we have very much been ramping up the sophistication. I can see Travis smiling on screen. We've been ramping up the sophistication and plausibility of some of those simulations more recently. And again, what that's telling us, we've got somewhere to go in terms of working with our staff and encouraging them and building their cyber security awareness. I think, again, a task that's never finished, but certainly recent evidence would suggest that we need to do some more work on that. I won't go any further than that. And another interesting thing we're doing at the moment, and we're in the middle of deploying this now, is that we are replacing our traditional authentication capability, so how people log in, and our two-factor or multi-factor authentication tooling, so how you secure people's login, often remote login. We're replacing that with a whole new solution, which is passwordless. And we're doing that really for two reasons. One is we do check what passwords our staff are using, and we do that securely. And we think that passwords are one of the single biggest points of vulnerability. And we do think that the industry is moving towards, I say the industry, technology and authentication globally. I think in 3 or 5 years' time, a lot of organizations will be using passwordless technology, and we wanted to be ahead of that curve, but we wanted to improve our multi-factor authentication capability. And by doing those two things at the same time, we're able, we think, to get a couple of steps ahead of our lender requirements. Honestly, there aren't too many companies doing this, particularly SME type companies like us. It isn't as expensive as you think, but it's quite a big change. And I think a lot of people don't adopt this technology because of the difficulties in implementing it more than the cost of actually doing it, the direct cost of the technology. So again, we're in the middle of rolling out now. We're hoping to finish the rollout of that to all of our staff by the end of the month. Over the next few months, I should have some valuable intelligence to share with people if you're interested about how that's gone for us, because it's not something we've done before. And I say it's not new technology, it's been around for a long time, but it's only now really starting to gain some momentum. So I think that's, for me, that would be of interest. If I was sitting in your chair, as it were, in your seat, I think to see if maybe you're already doing that, and if you're already using passwordless technology, I'd love to hear from you about how that's going. It might help us in terms of our journey. So very briefly, that's giving you a bit of a view of what we're working on, what we're doing. I'm going to tear through this because I think most of you are going to know this stuff, but very briefly, some do's and don'ts. Just test. Annual penetration tests aren't enough these days. We test monthly. You can do that, great. But even today, we find new issues on an ongoing basis. Vulnerabilities evolve and change, and new ones are created. Test as often as you can. And don't just test externally, test as much as you can. If you should be using multi-factor authentication, I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, are. Interesting statistic, 32% of all breaches in 2021 were via Microsoft remote access. So if you're not using multi-factor authentication, at least dual-factor authentication, you should be. Endpoint protection, do you know what? Again, I'm going to go out on a limb. Everybody here on this call probably has got some form of endpoint protection on their laptops and desktops and servers. The reason I'm calling this out, 2021, I read some data that said 54% of successful attacks were against an endpoint, maybe a laptop or a desktop, that was unprotected. Wow. So even when someone had deployed endpoint protections to that device, it wasn't turned on, or it didn't have it at all. And that's something that's relatively cheap to implement. Can be, free. There's free options out there even. But I think that point about my first point about testing, endpoint protection. Have you got endpoint protection? Great. Have you made sure that it's turned on and activated and it's up to date? Don't know. I've mentioned this a couple of times. Patch everything. Patch often. Patch as often as you can. Patch early. It will cause you problems occasionally in terms of if you put a patch out and it might affect your operations, but the cost of not patching could be massive. So I think again, probably most of you are doing that, but it's a good reminder, I think. One of the key points from this for me is staff training and awareness. You need to involve your staff in cybersecurity. Some of you are probably brilliant at that, better than us. We're trying really hard to bring staff with us on this journey. Obviously, training is part of that, staff awareness, conducting phishing simulations and giving them the feedback about how that went, giving them feedback about the type of passwords that they're using. You bring them with you on that journey, and just don't let that slip, that kind of constant drip feeding of cybersecurity information, knowledge, awareness, because they are, in essence, your first and last line of defense, their staff. Your integrations, most of you with law firms, you have hundreds of integrations, I'm sure. Maintaining those, rationalize the ones you don't need, make sure you use the latest versions, use integrations that are inherently secure, obviously. And things not to do, well, don't assume that your backups are okay. We did some testing. We test our backups on an ongoing basis, and it amazes me how many times we find backups that are not viable. I.e., you've got a backup, your backup software says, yeah, we've got a backup, it's great, it worked. But when you deploy it, it's not viable. So having, and there's a trend here and things that I'm saying, but testing is so important, but testing your backups. Make sure you've got 3 copies, make sure they're in 2 locations, make sure 1 copy is always offline, ransomware, offline copy of backup, super important, and then test them, make sure they're viable. Passwords, they're inherently vulnerable. Enforce your policies, assess the passwords your staff are using, communicate with your staff about that, and in the future, maybe build passwordless into your plan for the future. Maybe not in the next 6 months, maybe the next 12 months, but I think my own view is that we will all move towards passwordless solutions in the future, and it's something maybe we should be thinking about now. And email is inherently vulnerable. We all use email massively still. Encryption is easy to implement, more minimum encryption, certainly a basic level encryption on email is easy to implement. You'd be amazed at how many law firms we know do not use email encryption. We see that data, we report that monthly to internally, because we see emails coming and going. But wherever possible, don't use email, use a secure integration if you can. I'm probably overrunning, so there's a couple of things I was going to talk about there about some of our experience really in terms of things that we've found and learnings that we've had. I'm going to make it really succinct. Over the last couple of years, I think the one thing that we've learned above anything else is that we don't trust or assume anything now. Even if we implement a solution and we look at it and we've implemented the way we think we should and it looks good, we then test, we validate that. I've said it before. If you've got a backup and it says it's good, great, test it. Is it viable? If that security measure you implemented, get someone external to test it for you. Get someone else to do penetration testing every now and again. Don't just use the same organization. The more testing and validation you do of the measures you have in place and the mitigations you have in place, the more confident you should be about where you're at. But if you haven't tested it, I just wouldn't trust it. And that's learning we've had. And that learning is reinforced every day and every week for us. Okay, I'm probably a couple of minutes over, maybe 3 or 4 minutes over. How can LMS help? From our point of view, for me personally, this is a great opportunity to talk to you, a load of people that many of whom I won't have met before. We, as a business, are really open to working with you moving forward on, well, many considerations, cybersecurity, information security being one of them. So, if you would like to work with us, to engage with us one-to-one, or potentially even to do something, maybe on a bigger scale, some kind of consortium or community, we'd be really pleased to hear from you. It's something that we thought about doing before. If a number of you are interested in that, it's something that we might look to maybe support, invest in, and do some facilitation of some ongoing sessions. So, if you've got a view of that, if you'd like to be involved, please let us know after today, either through InfoTrack or direct to us. That'd be great. We have been investing a lot in building new integrations, and they're available to you. Through InfoTrack, you're very fortunate. InfoTrack are one of the organizations we love working with the most, because they're so proactive in this stuff, and technically they're so capable. So you do have the benefit of getting access to those integrations through InfoTrack. So please have a look at those. I think we're going to talk a bit more about that after I finish speaking. And I've mentioned SecureLink. I won't say it again, but I think we're really excited about SecureLink. If you don't know anything about it, ask, and we'll give you some more data about that. And actually, we've got a new product out in the market called Confirmly, which we think is really strong. I'm not the person to talk about that. I'm here to talk about cybersecurity, but as we move forward, maybe Travis, you're going to pick up that very briefly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So from my point of view, listen, I'm probably overrun by a couple of minutes. When I said we're not going to get through a ton of content in the time we've got available, that's what I meant. I've gone about as quickly as I hope you could cope with. I hope I haven't gone too fast. I will share my content, and I would love to get some questions from you at the end of this session, and we'll cover off as many of those as we can if we've got time. If not, we'll follow up. So I hope you got some value out of that. If you think about what I said I was hoping that you would get from it, I hope I've achieved that. I appreciate all of your attention, your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. And just following on from Mike here, we are going to do a quick demonstration of Confirmly and some of the integrations that we've built with InfoTrack. But just to follow up from my point of view, being on the senior management team at LMS, it does feel like cyber is now part of our culture. It's something we talk about quite regularly in all of our meetings, and we try and talk about our staff all of the time. It is something we're constantly on and constantly talking about, and it feels like it's part of everything that we do. I think that level of risk and that journey that Mike's just talking about has led us to build things like case export, mortgage offer distribution, our charge registration products, SecureLink and Confirmly. They are all designed to limit the opportunities for using additional passwords, for coming to extra portals, to keep you guys into the infrastructure and the ecosystems that you guys are comfortable with and should be most secure and highest protected, if that makes sense. So whether it's Confirmly and confirming the sort code and account number before you transfer funds and stopping a phishing scam, whether it's not having to come to conveyancer zone any longer and potentially looking at website impersonation, or your password being hacked and that information being available to a third party. Everything we built with InfoTrack, everything available to you guys now as law firms, is designed for reduction of risk, but also creates a level of efficiency as well. And with the time that we've got left, only a few minutes, we're going to hand over to Annabella here, who's going to take you through a quick demonstration of the products and services we've got available to you guys and how they can help you guys reduce risk, but also create a little bit of efficiency within the law firm as well. So very, very quickly, I'll hand over to Annabella.
Thank you, Travis. So I'll just share my screen so you can see the InfoTrack platform. So for the past 18 months, we've been working with LMS to integrate our platform with Conveyancer Zone to help reduce admin time and support you in meeting the requirements of the lenders. So Confirmly is the newest addition to this, so I'll run through that first. And then I'll also just quickly show you the mortgage offer and charge registration integration as well. And if you have any questions, please use the Q&A and we'll answer them at the end. So Confirmly is shown under the bank check section of the workflow, under lawyer bank check. So this search allows you to run a real-time check of the firm's details against LMS's panel link database, meaning that the information has been verified as part of their panel application process, and the details are constantly checked through each direct interaction with LMS to ensure that they remain up to date. So requesting the search is simple. I'll just put my meta reference in here. Obviously, if you're accessing through integrated, that will be pre-populated for you. So you just enter the firm name or address, and then the sort code and account number that they have provided to you. And then clicking the lookup does a live check against LMS's database, meaning that you're identifying the firm and their address before you run the check. So there's no delay due to a discrepancy in the firm name or anything like that. And then if too many searches are returned, you'll just be prompted to refine your search criteria. So you just select the matching firm from the list and click order. And then the search report will be returned instantly as a PDF and saved to your Matter, giving you a full audit trail so that you can easily demonstrate your compliance here. So the result will show the company name, the trading name, their address, and the bank account details that you have provided. It will clearly confirm whether they are a match for what LMS hold for that firm through a match or no match result. And then we've also got the risk reducer section here, which will advise the date that the firm's details are first added to LMS and when they were last changed for some additional reassurance. And then the search will also show any SRA alerts that have been issued for the firm in the past year, which will add a caution to the result so that you can investigate that further. And then for added peace of mind, the search is also backed by an indemnity. And then we've also got the mortgage offer integration, which we launched last year. So through the mortgage offer integration, all of your offers which are delivered to Conveyancer Zone can also be accessed through InfoTrack. So you won't need to log into Conveyancer Zone to download documents and upload them to your Matter. So when an offer is received, we'll send you a notification email including the lender and the address. And then you'll log into InfoTrack and open the mortgage offers dashboard on the left-hand side here where all of your offers will be shown. So when you click on an offer in the dashboard, you'll see the offer details on the right-hand side and the documents below, which you can preview here. And then you'll just confirm your matter reference. Go. And all of the information that we have about your matter will be displayed here. So you can just confirm that the address and the purchaser names are a match. And then you'll also select your case handler here as well, so that you won't need to log into LMS separately to do that. And we'll push that down to conveyancer zone for you. Tick to confirm that the offer is a match for this matter and click link to matter. And then once you've linked it to your matter, all of your documents will be shown in your matter viewer. And if your case management system is integrated with InfoTrack, sorry, just refresh that. If your case management system is integrated with InfoTrack, all of the offer documents will pull down to your matter as well for you. So you won't need to manually download those. And we'll also just add that you've received the mortgage offer to your workflow to give you some additional visibility there. And then if the lender issues a revised offer, we'll send you an email to notify you, but you won't have to link that again. The documents will just pull down automatically for you. And you can register for either of the integrations just by signing up on your dashboard. You'll see some orange registration buttons up here. And then similarly, through our charge registration integration, you can link your OS priority and your AP1 to the LMS case so that the documents will be pushed down to the case in conveyancer zone for you. So when you go to lodge your OS priority, you'll see a link to LMS option here. And if you've already linked your mortgage offer, we'll pre-select that case for you. Otherwise, you can just search for it on the drop down here. And then what that means is once the OS search is received from Land Registry, we'll push it down to conveyancer zone automatically for you. And then similarly on your AP1, towards the bottom of the form, you have the option to link to LMS here, and we've pre-selected that one because the mortgage offer is being linked. And then what we'll do with that is when we get the submission receipt to confirm that Land Registry have received the application, we push that down to conveyancer zone for you, and that will be uploaded to the confirmation of application to register section. And then likewise, once the AP1 completes, when we get the new register, we push that down to LMS for you as well. So that's it from me. I'll just hand over now to Faye to deal with any questions.
Perfect. Thank you very much indeed. Yes, so thank you, Mike and Travis, for your presentation and insights, and to Annabella for your demo. I can see we've had quite a few questions that have come through now from our audience. So let's jump straight into the Q&A part of the webinar now. So the first question is for Mike. Mike, how do you go about resolving the issue of different customers wanting you to have different password policies?
Yeah, there's no easy answer to that. In essence, we have had to decide our own policy. And so we've selected the policy that we think is most appropriate based on our own understanding of risks. And we have had to stick to our guns in terms of lenders that don't view that as best practice. We just said, well, listen, this is LMS best practice. Make them understand that actually, you know, listen, other lenders are asking for other things, but from our point of view, this is the approach that we're taking, and we're sticking to our guns. We've not had anyone who's kind of not accepted that, but although there've been some really interesting conversations, but you know, it's really tough. Sometimes we've had to leverage some information from the industry really about why our password policy is what it is. But yeah, it's a tough one. Negotiation.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. I have got a question that's come in for Annabella, please. How much is Confirmly?
So Confirmly is £15, including VAT.
Great, thank you. The next question, please. It's for Mike. How difficult was it, and how long did it take to achieve ISO 27001 accreditation?
Wow, great question. One that we were worried about when we started. And I think one of the reasons why we didn't go for ISO 27001 accreditation earlier was we were worried about the amount of work would be involved. And I'd say, there's a very empirical answer. It took us about 8 months to get the first audit done. We'd actually been doing some prep before then, so we'd actually been tidying up our policies and our processes before then. But we ran a project for ISO 27001 accreditation that ran for 8 months. And honestly, it probably wasn't as onerous as we thought it would be. And actually, the journey, the improving of our policies, our ways of working, looking at our information security management practices, for example, there was a lot of value in that we probably didn't expect. So yeah, the answer is this: 8 months. It wasn't as bad as we thought, although we do have a very capable compliance manager who'd done this many times before, and they walked us through that. We didn't get any external support through the journey. Obviously, the accreditation process, the audit process is paid for, but no, so actually 8 months and it was okay.
Great, thank you. Another question, which I think I can answer. Someone has said, please, can they have a copy of the slides and a copy of the session? They'd like to show their staff, and how can we contact you to follow up after the staff have seen the session? So just to let everybody know, we will be sending a copy of this recording to everyone that's attended, and I'll ensure that contact details for LMS and InfoTrack are included in that with you. So that's that question covered. The next question is for Annabella, please. How much is the mortgage integration per transaction to receive offers via InfoTrack?
Thanks, Faye. So for the mortgage offers, it's £1 plus VAT per offer. And then for the charge registration integration, that's completely free.
Great, thank you. And I've got another one. Do we also send updates to LMS for the delay reasons, please, Annabella?
Yeah, so at the moment, the updates to the delay reasons remains in conveyancer's own. This is a process that we're looking at the moment, though, with LMS. So we're hoping to be able to share something soon about a new process there. But at the moment, you still would need to go into conveyancer's own to update the lender if your charge hasn't been registered for 30 days.
It is in development, that piece of work, just for everybody's still on the call. So we are working actively on trying to improve that right now.
That's great, thank you. I have another question from Mike. I think we're almost out of questions now, so we're coming to the end. You said that you recently appointed a new provider for the managed detection and response service. How did you select them?
Yeah, it's really interesting that we went to the market. So we ran a procurement process and did an eval. But we had 5 companies in the end that we worked with, and they presented to us. And on that basis, we had a really tough decision to make, actually, because a couple of them were really strong. But we ended up going for what we felt was the one that future-proofed us the most. So I won't name the vendor, I won't name the company. I don't think that's appropriate for this session. If anyone's interested, I'm happy to share that with individuals later. But like I say, yeah, it took quite a long time. We were about 4 or 5 months from start to finish on that procurement process, because we felt it was a really, really key decision we needed to make. So we did talk to a number of organizations that offered services, and we did look at a number of different options, varying options in terms of the technology that underpinned it. So yeah, we'll know more over the next few months.
Great, thank you, Mike. This is the last question then, and this one is for Annabella, please. How much is the lender handbook?
Oh, so sorry, I skipped over the lender handbook one just because we're running over a little bit. But we do have the lender handbook incorporated into the platform. You can view parts 1, 2, and 3 for all lenders, and that's completely free of charge. And then we also have the ability to sign up to email alerts. So we'll email you to let you know when the lender makes a change, and we check the handbook throughout the day, so we're always up to date. And then separately to that, we have a search for updates report, which is £4.80, and that enables you to look back and see if there has been any changes to the handbook since the onset of your matter, and get a full audit trail of those as well.
Perfect, thank you. That's great. Okay, well, I think we are now out of time, so I think it's time to wrap this up. Mike and Travis from LMS for joining us today, and also to Annabella from InfoTrack. And I hope you've all found this session very informative. If you do have any other questions about anything you've learned today or questions on cybersecurity, then please either contact us using the details on your screen or reach out to your account manager who will be able to assist you. We've already mentioned that this session is being recorded and we're going to send you a copy so that you can refer back to it. So all that's left to say is thank you very much indeed for joining us today. Hope you found the session interesting and informative, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much indeed. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.